I inherited my grandfather's property in Riverside, California, 3 years ago. And honestly, I never thought a piece of empty land would cause me more trouble than anything else in my life. My name is Michael Reynolds, and I'm a software engineer who works remotely, which means I have plenty of time to deal with nonsense when it comes my way. The lot was just sitting there, a quarter-acre of flat land with some desert landscaping that my grandfather had maintained until he passed. I paid the property taxes, kept it clean, and had plans to maybe build something on it someday. What I didn't plan for was Brenda Patterson, the HOA president of the Riverside Springs Community Association, deciding that my property was hers to do whatever she wanted with. It started on a Tuesday morning in late March when I drove past my lot on the way to grab coffee. There were tables set up, actual folding tables with white tablecloths, chairs arranged in neat rows, and a banner that read, Riverside Springs Spring Festival. People were walking around with clipboards, and someone was setting up what looked like a small stage near the back of the property. My property. I pulled over immediately, my heart racing. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe they thought this was the community park 3 blocks down. I got out of my car and walked over to a woman who was directing 2 guys carrying a wooden podium. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can I ask what's going on here?" The woman, who was probably in her mid-50s with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, turned to me with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a pastel pink blazer and matching pants, the kind of outfit that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." "Oh, hello, are you here to help with setup? We could use some strong arms to help with the tent in about an hour." "No, I'm Michael Reynolds. I own this property. Why are you setting up on my land?" Her smile faltered for just a second before it came back even wider. "Oh, you must be confused. This is the community event space. The HOA has been using it for years. The HOA doesn't own this property. I do. I inherited it from my grandfather, Richard Reynolds, and I have the deed to prove it." She waved her hand dismissively. "Mr. Reynolds, your grandfather had an understanding with the community. We've always used this space for our events. It's tradition. Tradition doesn't give you legal right to use private property without permission. I need everyone to pack up and leave. Now." The woman's expression shifted from fake friendly to genuinely irritated. "I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Riverside Springs Community Association. We have over 200 people coming to this festival tomorrow. We've sent out invitations, collected fees for vendors, and made commitments. You can't just shut us down." "I can, and I am. This is private property, and you're trespassing." Brenda pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. "According to our records, this land has been designated for community use since 2018. Your grandfather signed an agreement." "Show me the agreement." She held up her phone, showing me a document that looked official enough. I took a closer look, and that's when I saw it. The signature at the bottom wasn't my grandfather's. It was close, but my grandfather had a very distinctive way of signing his name, with a flourish on the R that this signature didn't have. Plus, the date was from 6 months before he died, when he was already in the hospital and couldn't have signed anything. "This signature is forged," I said flatly. "My grandfather was hospitalized during this entire period. He couldn't have signed this." Brenda's face went red. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" "I'm stating a fact. This isn't his signature, and even if it was, any agreement would have ended with his death. The property transferred to me, and I never agreed to any community use." She stepped closer, and I could smell her heavy perfume. "Listen here, Mr. Reynolds. This community has standards and traditions. We've invested time and money into this festival. If you try to shut us down, you'll be making enemies of everyone in this neighborhood." "Then I guess I'll have enemies. Get off my property or I'm calling the police." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Fine, but this isn't over. The HOA has rights, and I'll make sure you understand that." She turned and started barking orders at the volunteers, telling them to pack everything up. I stood there and watched, making sure every table, every chair, and every piece of decoration was removed. It took them 2 hours, and Brenda glared at me the entire time. When the last truck pulled away, she stopped in front of me. "You've made a big mistake today," she said. "The HOA will be hearing about this." "Looking forward to it," I replied. She got in her car and drove off, leaving me standing on my empty lot. I should have felt victorious, but instead, I just felt uneasy. Something about the way she said, "This isn't over," made me think this was just the beginning. I was right. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from the Riverside Springs Community Association. It was a formal notice stating that my property was in violation of multiple HOA codes, including failure to maintain landscaping to community standards, improper fencing, and unauthorized land use. Each violation came with a fine of $500, totaling $1,500 due within 30 days. The thing was, my property wasn't even part of the HOA. When my grandfather bought the land in 1987, it was outside the community boundaries. The HOA was formed in 1995 and encompassed the residential streets around my lot, but my property was specifically excluded. I knew this because I'd reviewed all the documents when I inherited it. I called the number on the letter and got a receptionist who transferred me to Brenda. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm glad you called," she said in that fake sweet voice. "I trust you received our notice?" "I did, and it's garbage. My property isn't part of your HOA." "Actually, in 2012, the community boundaries were expanded to include your lot. It's all legal and on file with the county." "Show me the documentation." "It's public record. You're welcome to visit the county office and review it yourself. In the meantime, those fines stand. We expect payment by the deadline." I hung up and immediately drove to the Riverside County Recorder's office. I spent the next 3 hours going through records, and here's what I found. In 2012, the HOA did file paperwork to expand their boundaries, but my property was not included in that expansion. The map they filed specifically showed my lot as an exclusion, marked with a notation that read, "Private property R. Reynolds, not subject to HOA covenants." I made copies of everything and drove straight to a lawyer's office. I'd found an attorney named James Kowalski who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. He was a guy in his early 60s with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept pushing up his nose. "This is pretty clear cut," he said after reviewing my documents. "Your property isn't part of the HOA, never has been. They have no authority to fine you or dictate what you do with your land." "So what do I do?" "We send them a cease and desist letter. If they continue, we can sue for harassment and seek an injunction. Do you want to go that route?" "Yes, I want this stopped now." James drafted the letter that afternoon, and we sent it via certified mail and email to Brenda Patterson and the HOA board. It clearly stated that my property was not subject to HOA authority, that all fines were invalid, and that any further attempts to assert control over my property would result in legal action. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my neighbor, Tom Hendricks, who lived in the house closest to my lot. Tom was a retired teacher, a nice guy who I'd talked to a few times about gardening. "Michael, I don't know if you've been by your lot lately, but you might want to check it out," he said, sounding worried. I drove over immediately. When I got there, I couldn't believe what I saw. Someone had started construction. There was a concrete foundation being poured in the center of my lot, and workers were setting up forms. A truck with a mixer was idling on the street, and 3 guys in hard hats were directing the pour. I jumped out of my car and ran over. "Stop! What are you doing?" One of the workers, a stocky guy with a thick beard, looked up. "We're pouring a foundation. You with the HOA?" "No, I'm the property owner. Who hired you?" He pulled out a work order and showed it to me. It was from Patterson Construction, contracted by the Riverside Springs Community Association to build a community pavilion on this lot. "This is private property," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You need to stop right now." The worker looked confused. "We've got permits and everything. The lady who hired us said this was HOA land." "It's not. I'm calling the police." I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer. While I waited, I took photos of everything: the workers, the truck, the foundation being poured, the work order. The workers had stopped and were standing around looking uncomfortable. A Riverside police officer arrived about 15 minutes later. Her name tag read Officer Martinez, and she listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed her my property deed and the recent letter from my attorney. "Do you have permits for this construction?" she asked the workers. The bearded guy nodded and pulled out some paperwork. Officer Martinez reviewed it and frowned. These permits list the Riverside Springs Community Association as the property owner. If Mr. Reynolds can prove he owns the property, this is a civil matter, but the construction needs to stop until it's resolved. I can prove it right now, I said, pulling up the county records on my phone. Here's the deed, here's the tax assessment showing me as the owner, and here's the letter from my attorney sent to the HOA 2 weeks ago. Officer Martinez made some notes. Okay, gentlemen, you need to stop work immediately. This is a property dispute that needs to be resolved before any construction continues. The workers started packing up, and the bearded guy called someone on his phone. I heard him say, "Yeah, there's a problem. The guy who says he owns the land is here with the cops." About 10 minutes later, Brenda Patterson showed up in her silver Mercedes. She got out looking furious, her face flushed red. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "We have permits and authorization." "From whom?" Officer Martinez asked calmly. "From the HOA board. This is community property designated for a pavilion that will serve all residents." "Madam, Mr. Reynolds has provided documentation showing he owns this property. Do you have a deed or title showing the HOA owns it?" Brenda faltered. "We have an agreement with the previous owner." "The forged agreement I already told you about," I interjected. "My grandfather never signed over any rights, and even if he had, I never agreed to honor any such agreement." Officer Martinez looked at Brenda. "Madam, unless you can provide documentation proving the HOA owns this property or has legal right to build on it, this construction cannot continue. This is private property." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "This is ridiculous. We've already paid for materials and labor. You can't just shut us down." "Yes, I can," I said. "And I'm going to sue you and the HOA for trespassing, destruction of property, and fraud. You falsified permits by claiming you owned land you don't own." Officer Martinez nodded. "Mr. Reynolds has the right to press charges. Madam, I suggest you contact your attorney." Brenda turned to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're going to regret this. I will make your life hell." "Is that a threat?" Officer Martinez asked, stepping forward. "Madam, I need you to calm down." Brenda took a deep breath and stepped back. "I want it on record that this man is disrupting legitimate community improvement projects." "Noted," Officer Martinez said dryly. "Now, I need everyone to clear this property. Mr. Reynolds, do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want documentation of everything that happened here today." Officer Martinez wrote up a report, and I got a copy. The construction crew left, Brenda drove away after one last glare, and I was left standing on my lot with a half-poured concrete foundation. I called James Kowalski immediately and sent him all the photos in the police report. "This is escalating," he said. "They're not just harassing you anymore. They've committed fraud by obtaining permits under false pretenses and trespassing. We need to act quickly." "What do you recommend?" "We file for an emergency injunction and sue for damages. We also report the permit fraud to the county. This is serious, Michael." We spent the next week preparing the case. James filed a lawsuit against the Riverside Springs Community Association and Brenda Patterson personally, seeking an injunction to prevent any further attempts to use or build on my property, as well as damages for the trespassing and the cost of removing the concrete foundation they'd poured. The hearing for the emergency injunction was scheduled for early May. In the meantime, James advised me to hire a surveyor to clearly mark my property boundaries and to install security cameras to document any further trespassing. I hired a surveying company called Precision Land Surveys, and they came out the next day. The surveyor, a guy named Mark Chen, was thorough. He spent 3 hours taking measurements, checking records, and setting up markers. When he was done, he showed me the results. "Your property lines are exactly where you thought they were," he said. "I've placed stakes at all 4 corners with orange flags. I'll also provide you with a detailed report and map that you can use in court." "Thanks, I appreciate it. I also bought 4 security cameras and set them up around the perimeter of the lot, all connected to my phone so I'd get alerts if anyone entered the property." 2 days later, at about 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with an alert. The camera showed Brenda and 2 other women walking onto my lot. I was at home, only 10 minutes away, so I grabbed my keys and drove over. When I arrived, Brenda and her friends were standing in the middle of the lot looking at the survey stakes. One of them, a tall woman with short brown hair, was actually pulling up one of the stakes. "Hey!" I shouted, getting out of my car. "What do you think you're doing?" They all turned, and Brenda's face twisted into a sneer. "These stakes are in the wrong place. They're encroaching on community property. Those stakes mark the legal boundaries of my property, as determined by a licensed surveyor. You're trespassing and you're destroying survey markers, which is illegal." The woman holding the stake dropped it like it was hot. "We didn't know." "Yes, you did," I said. "I've sent multiple letters, had the police here, and filed a lawsuit. You know exactly what you're doing." Brenda crossed her arms. "We're simply protecting community interests. This land has been used by the community for years, and we're not going to let some outsider come in and take it away." "I'm not an outsider. I inherited property that was never yours to begin with, and destroying survey markers is a misdemeanor in California. I have you on camera." I pulled out my phone and showed them the footage. All three women went pale. "You're recording us?" one of them asked, horrified. "It's my property. I have every right to record what happens on it." Brenda recovered quickly. "Fine, we'll leave. But mark my words, Michael Reynolds, this community will not stand for your selfish behavior. We'll fight you every step of the way." They left, and I immediately called James to tell him what happened. He advised me to file a police report for destruction of the survey markers, which I did. Officer Martinez came out again, reviewed the camera footage, and wrote up another report. "Mr. Reynolds, you're building quite a case here," she said. "If they keep this up, they're going to end up in real trouble." "Good," I said. "Maybe then they'll leave me alone." The hearing for the injunction was on May 8th. James and I arrived at the courthouse early. Brenda was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Derek Morrison. The judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Lynn, reviewed the filings and listened to both sides. James presented all the documentation. My property deed, the county records showing my lot was not part of the HOA, the forged agreement, the evidence of trespassing and construction, and the police reports. Derek Morrison argued that the community had a legitimate expectation of use based on years of tradition, and that my sudden enforcement of property rights was causing harm to the community. Judge Lynn was not impressed. "Mr. Morrison, tradition does not override property law. Your client has repeatedly trespassed on Mr. Reynolds' property, obtained permits under false pretenses, and engaged in harassment. I'm granting the injunction. The Riverside Springs Community Association and its representatives are hereby ordered to cease all contact with Mr. Reynolds' property, to make no further claims of ownership or use rights, and to remove any materials or structures they've placed on the property. Furthermore, they are to pay Mr. Reynolds' legal fees and the cost of removing the concrete foundation. If they violate this order, they will be held in contempt of court." Brenda's face went purple. She started to stand up, but Derek grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. "Your Honor," Derek said, "we request time to review the financials." "You have 30 days to comply with all terms of this order," Judge Lynn said. "This hearing is adjourned." James and I walked out feeling victorious. "That went better than I expected," he said. "What happens now?" "They have to follow the court order. If they don't, we can go back to court for contempt, and they could face fines or even jail time." I should have been relieved, but I had a sinking feeling that Brenda wasn't going to give up that easily. I was right, but what happened next was stranger than I could have imagined. About a week after the hearing, I got a call from a woman named Amanda Ellis. She identified herself as a reporter for the Riverside Press Enterprise. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm doing a story on HOA disputes in Riverside County, and your case came up. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. "What kind of story?" "Just a factual account of what happened. I've reviewed the court records, and it seems like a pretty clear case of HOA overreach. I'd like to get your perspective." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my house. Amanda turned out to be a woman in her 30s with curly red hair and sharp green eyes. She had a notebook and a recorder, and she was all business. "So tell me what happened," she said after we'd ordered coffee. I walked her through the entire story, from finding the festival set up on my lot to the court hearing. She took notes and asked clarifying questions. "Have you heard from the HOA since the injunction?" she asked. "No, but I've been watching my property closely. They have 30 days to remove the concrete foundation. And if they don't? Then they're in contempt of court. Amanda nodded. I've been looking into the Riverside Springs Community Association, and your case isn't the first complaint. There have been at least 6 other disputes in the past 3 years, all involving Brenda Patterson. What kind of disputes? Excessive fines, selective enforcement of rules, harassment of homeowners who challenge her authority. One family had to sell their house and move because she made their lives so miserable. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? Because most people don't want to fight. Legal battles are expensive and stressful. The HOA has a legal fund, so they can afford to drag things out. Most homeowners eventually give up. Well, I'm not giving up, Amanda smiled. I can see that. I think your story is going to resonate with a lot of people. The article came out 3 days later. On May 18th, it was front page of the local section with the headline, HOA, President Accused of Property Fraud and Harassment. Amanda had done her homework. She'd interviewed other homeowners who had issues with Brenda, reviewed court records, and even found the forged agreement and compared it to my grandfather's real signature. The article went viral locally. By the end of the day, it had been shared thousands of times on social media. People were outraged. Comments poured in from current and former residents of Riverside Springs, sharing their own horror stories about Brenda Patterson and the HOA. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Michael Reynolds? A man's voice asked. Yes, who's this? My name is David Park. I'm on the HOA board, and I wanted to apologize for everything that's happened. A lot of us had no idea what Brenda was doing. You're on the board, and you didn't know she was forging documents and trespassing on private property? She handles most of the day-to-day operations. We meet quarterly to review financials and approve major projects, but she didn't bring any of this to the board. We found out about the lawsuit when we were served, and after that article came out today, we started digging into what she's been doing. It's bad, Michael. Really bad. How bad? She's been using HOA funds for personal expenses, approving projects without board votes, and falsifying records. We're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night to remove her as president. Good. But that doesn't fix what she did to my property. I know. We're going to pay to remove that concrete foundation immediately, and we'll cover all your legal fees. We just want this resolved. I appreciate that, but I'm not dropping the lawsuit until everything is documented and completed. I understand. Can we meet tomorrow? I'd like to discuss this in person. I agreed, and we met the next afternoon at a restaurant in downtown Riverside. David Park turned out to be a Korean-American guy in his 40s, dressed in business casual and looking stressed. Bean, I want to start by saying that what Brenda did was completely unauthorized and wrong, he said. The board never approved using your property, and we certainly never approved forging documents or falsifying permit applications. So what are you going to do about it? We're removing her as president tonight. We're also conducting a full audit of the HOA's finances and operations. If we find evidence of embezzlement or fraud, we're turning it over to the authorities. What about the other homeowners she's harassed? We're reviewing all fines and penalties issued in the past 3 years. Any that seem excessive or unjustified will be reversed. That's a good start. We're also willing to make a settlement offer. We'll pay for the removal of the concrete, reimburse all your legal fees, and pay an additional $10,000 for your trouble. In exchange, you agree to drop the lawsuit. I thought about it. $10,000 was generous, but more importantly, it sounded like the HOA was actually trying to make things right. I'll talk to my attorney, but I want everything in writing, and I want the concrete removed within 2 weeks. Done. We'll have a crew out there by the end of the week. True to his word, a demolition crew showed up on Friday morning. They jackhammered the concrete foundation into pieces, hauled it all away, and restored the ground to its original condition. By Monday, my lot looked like nothing had ever happened. The HOA board held their emergency meeting on May 20th. According to David, who called me afterward, Brenda was removed as president by a unanimous vote of the other board members. She'd shown up and tried to defend herself, claiming that everything she'd done was in the community's best interest. But when they confronted her with evidence of unauthorized expenditures and falsified records, she'd stormed out. The story didn't end there, though. On May 25th, Amanda Ellis published a follow-up article revealing that the HOA's audit had uncovered over $50,000 in unauthorized expenses charged to Brenda personally. She'd been using HOA funds to pay for personal travel, home renovations, and even her daughter's college tuition. The HOA board filed a report with the Riverside Police Department, and on May 28th, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. I heard about it from Tom Hendricks, who called me sounding both shocked and satisfied. "They just took her away in handcuffs," he said. "There must have been 10 neighbors standing outside watching. She was screaming about how this was all your fault." "My fault?" "Yeah, she was saying you started a witch hunt against her and turned everyone against her. The cops weren't having it, though. They just put her in the car and drove off." I didn't feel good about someone being arrested, even Brenda, but I also didn't feel guilty. She'd brought this on herself by lying, cheating, and harassing people for years. I'd just been the one who finally stood up to her. The settlement with the HOA was finalized on June 2nd. They paid for all the damages, my legal fees, and the additional $10,000. James took his cut, and I was left with a check for about $8,000, and, more importantly, my property free and clear. But the biggest surprise came on June 10th. I got a call from David Park again. "Michael, I know this might sound crazy, but I wanted to run something by you." "What's that?" "The board has been discussing what to do with the annual community festival. It was always one of our biggest events, and people are disappointed that we had to cancel it this year. We were wondering if you'd be willing to rent your lot to us for the festival. We'd pay a fair rate, sign a proper contract, and of course, get your permission for everything." I was surprised. After everything that had happened, I'd expected the HOA to want nothing to do with me. "How much are we talking about?" "We were thinking $2,000 for a weekend rental. We'd handle all setup and cleanup, and we'd carry liability insurance in case anything goes wrong." $2,000 for a weekend seemed reasonable. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take your time." I spent the next few days considering it. Part of me wanted to tell them to get lost after everything I'd been through. But another part of me remembered what Tom had said about the festival being something the community really enjoyed. It wasn't the neighbors' fault that Brenda had been corrupt and power-hungry. I called David back on June 15th. "I'll do it, but I have some conditions." "Name them." "I want a written contract stating exactly what you can and can't do on the property. I want proof of insurance, and I want it clear that this is a one-time rental, not an ongoing agreement or any kind of easement." "Absolutely. I'll have our attorney draft a contract today." The contract arrived 2 days later. It was straightforward. A one-time rental of my property for 3 days in September for the community festival, with payment of $2,000, proof of $2 million in liability insurance, and specific terms about what could and couldn't be done on the land. I signed it and sent it back. Over the summer, I actually started getting to know some of my neighbors. Tom introduced me to several people who lived in Riverside Springs, and most of them were friendly and grateful that I'd stood up to Brenda. A few even apologized for not standing up to her themselves. "She was intimidating," one woman told me. "She'd fine you for the smallest things, and if you complained, she'd make your life hell. It was easier to just go along with what she wanted." I understood. Not everyone has the resources or energy to fight a legal battle, especially when the other side has institutional backing. Brenda's legal troubles continued through the summer. In July, she was indicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. Her trial was set for October. According to Amanda Ellis, who continued to follow the story, the prosecution had a mountain of evidence, including financial records, forged documents, and testimony from multiple homeowners and contractors. In August, I got a strange piece of mail. It was a handwritten letter from Brenda Patterson herself. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won out. The letter was bizarre. She rambled about how she'd only been trying to improve the community, how I'd ruined her life, and how I'd turned everyone against her. She didn't apologize or take any responsibility. It was all about how unfair everything was and how she was the real victim. At the end, she wrote, "I hope you can live with yourself knowing what you've done to an innocent woman and her family." I showed the letter to James, who advised me to keep it, but not respond. She's probably going to try to use emotional manipulation in her defense, he said. This letter just shows she still doesn't get it. The community festival happened on September 18th through 20th. The HOA did a great job organizing it. They had food vendors, live music, games for kids, and even a small carnival with rides. I stopped by on Saturday afternoon, and David Park insisted on introducing me to everyone as the man who made this all possible. It was a little embarrassing, but people were genuinely grateful. Several vendors thanked me for renting the space, and one family told me their kids had been looking forward to the festival all summer. I stayed for a couple of hours, ate some excellent barbecue, and watched people having a good time. It felt good to see my property being used for something positive instead of being the center of a legal battle. The festival wrapped up on Sunday evening, and on Monday morning, a cleanup crew came and removed every trace of the event. My lot was spotless, and the $2,000 check cleared the next day. Brenda's trial began on October 5th. Amanda Ellis covered it for the newspaper, and I followed along with her articles. The prosecution laid out a detailed case showing how Brenda had systematically stolen from the HOA for over 5 years, forged documents to cover her tracks, and harassed homeowners who questioned her authority. The forged agreement involving my grandfather's property was presented as evidence of her willingness to commit fraud. Brenda's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been overwhelmed by the responsibilities of running the HOA and had made mistakes, but the evidence was overwhelming. On October 18th, the jury came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Brenda broke down crying in the courtroom, and her husband had to help her out. Sentencing was scheduled for November. The prosecution was asking for 4 years in prison and full restitution to the HOA and all affected homeowners. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but Amanda called me afterward to let me know the results. She got 3 years in state prison and 5 years probation, Amanda said. She also has to pay back everything she stole, plus fines. The judge was pretty harsh. She said Brenda had violated the trust of her community and abused her position of authority. How did she react? She tried to make a statement about how sorry she was, but the judge cut her off, said she'd had plenty of opportunities to make things right and chose not to. It was pretty dramatic. I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was glad justice had been served, but I also felt a bit sad that it had come to this. If Brenda had just respected property rights and acted with basic honesty, none of this would have happened. In December, the HOA reached out again, this time asking if I'd be willing to rent the lot for a holiday festival. I agreed, and we went through the same process. Another weekend, another event, another payment. It was turning into a nice little side income. Over the winter, I started seriously thinking about what to do with the property long term. I'd originally planned to build on it someday, but now I was seeing the value in keeping it as an open space. In January, I met with David Park and proposed a longer-term arrangement. What if we did a formal rental agreement, I suggested. The HOA could rent the lot for, say, 6 events per year at a set rate. You'd have a predictable schedule, and I'd have steady income. David liked the idea. How much are you thinking? $12,000 per year for up to 6 events. Each event can be up to 3 days. You carry insurance, you handle all setup and cleanup, and I retain all ownership rights. That's fair. Let me present it to the board. The board approved it unanimously, and we signed a 3-year agreement in February. It was a win-win. The HOA got a space for their community events. I got reliable income from property that was otherwise just sitting there, and everyone was clear on the terms and boundaries. In March, exactly 1 year after the whole mess started, I was having coffee with Tom Hendricks and reflecting on everything that had happened. You know, Tom said, you really changed this community. Before you stood up to Brenda, people were afraid to question anything. Now we've got a board that actually listens to residents and follows the rules. I just wanted to protect my property. I know, but you did more than that. You showed people that bullies can be stopped, even when they have institutional power. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I supposed he was right. The new HOA leadership was transparent. They'd reversed dozens of unfair fines, and they'd implemented new policies to prevent any one person from having too much control. Amanda Ellis wrote one final article in April, A year later, retrospective on the whole situation. She interviewed me, several homeowners, the new HOA president, and even Brenda's attorney. The article painted a picture of a community that had been held hostage by one person's ego and greed, and how it had come together to fix itself after that person was removed. The article ended with a quote from me. "I never wanted to be the guy who took down the HOA president. I just wanted my property respected. But sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone." As I write this in late April, Brenda Patterson is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino. The HOA has rebuilt its reputation and its finances. My lot hosts community events several times a year, bringing people together for festivals, farmers markets, and holiday celebrations. And I've learned that property rights aren't just about ownership, they're about respect, honesty, and the rule of law. I still drive past my lot several times a week. Sometimes it's empty, just quarter-acre of land with desert landscaping. Other times it's full of people, tables, music, and laughter. Either way, it's mine, and everyone knows it. That's all I ever wanted. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, documents matter. If I hadn't kept careful records and been able to prove ownership, Brenda might have gotten away with her scheme. Second, standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. Brenda had gotten away with her behavior for years because no one challenged her. Third, most people are reasonable when given the chance. The new HOA board genuinely wanted to do right by everyone once Brenda was out of the picture. I also learned something about community. Before this all happened, I thought of my inherited lot as just a piece of property, something I owned but didn't really connect with. Now I see it as part of something bigger. When I watch families enjoying the festivals or kids running around during the holiday events, I feel like I'm contributing something valuable. Tom told me recently that property values in Riverside Springs have actually gone up since Brenda was removed and the HOA reformed. People want to live in a community with fair leadership and reasonable rules. Who would have thought that my fight to protect my empty lot would end up benefiting everyone? In May, on the anniversary of the injunction hearing, James Kowalski and I had lunch to catch up. He'd retired from regular practice but still did consulting work. "You know, your case became something of a legend in property law circles," he said. "I've had 3 attorneys contact me, asking if they could cite it in their own HOA dispute cases." "Really?" "Really, it's a textbook example of HOA overreach and how to fight it properly. You documented everything, you didn't back down, and you let the legal system work. A lot of people make mistakes in these situations. They get emotional, they retaliate inappropriately, or they give up too soon. You did it right." I felt proud of that. I'd been scared plenty of times during the process, worried about legal bills and how far Brenda would go, but I'd stuck to my principles and trusted the system. The summer of the second year brought another development. A documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles reached out, wanting to include my story in a film about HOA abuses across America. I was skeptical at first, but after talking to her and seeing that she was serious about exploring the systemic issues, I agreed to participate. The filming happened in July. They interviewed me on my property, talked to Tom and other neighbors, got footage of one of the community festivals, and even interviewed David Park about the reforms the HOA had implemented. They also tried to interview Brenda in prison, but she refused. The documentary, titled "The HOA Files When Communities Become Corporations," premiered at a film festival in October and ended up getting distribution on a streaming platform. My story was one of 5 case studies, and it generated a lot of discussion online about HOA reform and homeowner rights. I even got invited to speak at a property rights conference in Sacramento in November. It was strange standing in front of 200 people talking about my experience, but I focused on the practical lessons. Know your rights, document everything, find a good attorney, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. After my talk, several people came up to share their own HOA horror stories. Some were still fighting their battles, and I tried to offer whatever advice and encouragement I could. One woman told me she'd been inspired by my story to finally challenge unfair fines her HOA had been levying against her. She'd won her case just a month earlier. By December of that second year, life had settled into a comfortable routine. I continued my software engineering work, I collected my quarterly rental payments from the HOA, and I'd become a somewhat unexpected advocate for property rights and HOA reform. The California state legislature was even considering new regulations to prevent HOA abuses, inspired in part by cases like mine. Brenda Patterson, meanwhile, remained in prison. I heard through the grapevine that she'd become something of a pariah among the other inmates because she constantly complained and tried to boss people around. And some habits, I guess, are hard to break. In January of the third year, I received a letter from Brenda's daughter, Nicole. She was in her mid-20s and wrote to apologize for her mother's behavior. She explained that she'd paid back the tuition money her mother had stolen from the HOA, even though she hadn't known where the money came from at the time. She said she'd cut off contact with her mother and was trying to rebuild her own life. I wrote back, thanking her for the letter and wishing her well. I told her that she wasn't responsible for her mother's choices and that I hoped she'd be able to move forward. She sent one more note thanking me for my understanding, and that was the end of our correspondence. The 3-year rental agreement with the HOA came up for renewal in February. David Park, who was now serving as HOA president, asked if I wanted to extend it. We negotiated a new 5-year agreement with a slight increase in the annual fee to account for inflation. I also added a clause allowing me to terminate the agreement with 6 months' notice if I ever decided to build on the property. In March of that third year, almost exactly 3 years after this all started, I took a day to just sit on my property and reflect. I'd brought a lawn chair and a cooler with some drinks, and I spent the afternoon watching clouds drift by and thinking about how much had changed. The property was still mine. That fundamental fact hadn't changed, but everything around it had transformed. The community was healthier, the HOA was better run, and I'd discovered a purpose for the land that I never would have imagined. I thought about my grandfather and wondered what he would have thought of all this. He'd been a quiet man, not one for confrontation, but he'd also been principled. I think he would have approved of how I'd stood my ground, and I think he would have loved seeing the community using the land for festivals and gatherings. He'd always been a people person, even if he didn't say much. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tom walked over from his house. He'd brought beer, and we sat together in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the evening. "You ever regret it?" he asked finally. "All the stress and legal battles?" I thought about it. No, it wasn't fun at the time, but it was the right thing to do. And it worked out better than I could have hoped. "You know what I think?" Tom said. "I think your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he left you this property. He knew it might cause problems, but he also knew you were the person who could handle them." I'd never thought of it that way, but maybe Tom was right. My grandfather had other grandchildren he could have left the property to, but he'd chosen me. Maybe he'd sensed that I had the stubbornness and principles to protect it. We finished our beers as the stars came out, and Tom headed home. I stayed a little longer, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Dogs barking in the distance, someone's television through an open window, the hum of traffic from the main road a few blocks away. This was my community now, not just my property. And that made all the difference. Brenda Patterson was released from prison in April on good behavior after serving 2 years of her 3-year sentence. I heard about it from Amanda Ellis, who'd kept in touch over the years. "She's moving to Arizona to live with her sister," Amanda told me. "Her husband divorced her while she was inside, and from what I understand, most of her old friends have cut ties." "Do you think she learned anything?" I asked. Amanda laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Based on an interview request she sent me, no, she still thinks she was unfairly persecuted and that everyone overreacted. Some people never get it. I didn't hear anything directly from Brenda after her release, and I was grateful for that. I'd moved on with my life, and I hoped she'd do the same, even if she couldn't see her own role in what had happened. That summer, the 4th year after everything started, the HOA organized their biggest festival yet. They'd partnered with local businesses in the city to put on a 3-day event that drew over 1,000 people. There were food trucks, craft vendors, live bands, a beer garden, and activities for kids. My little 1/4-acre lot was packed with people having a great time. I walked through on Saturday afternoon, marveling at how something that had started with such conflict had turned into something so positive. A little girl ran past me chasing a balloon, and her mother apologized, smiling. I told her it was fine and watched them disappear into the crowd. David Park found me near the beer garden and insisted on buying me a drink. "You know, Michael, this wouldn't exist without you. Not just the space, but the whole culture change. The HOA actually serves the community now instead of the other way around." "You and the rest of the board did that," I said. "I just refused to let someone steal my property." Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to say no and mean it. We clinked glasses and drank to that. As fall approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'd been offered a promotion at work that would require relocating to Seattle. It was a great opportunity, but it meant I'd be leaving Riverside. I spent several weeks thinking about what to do with the property. I could sell it, but that felt wrong after everything I'd been through to protect it. I could keep it and continue the rental agreement with the HOA remotely, which was certainly an option, or I could do something different. In October, I met with David and the HOA board with a proposal. I wanted to deed the property to the community with several conditions. It would be held in a land trust specifically for community events and open space. It could never be developed or sold. The HOA would maintain it and could use it for events, but it would be open to the public, not just HOA members. And it would be named the Richard Reynolds Memorial Park, after my grandfather. The board was surprised but enthusiastic. "Are you sure?" David asked. "This is valuable property." "I'm sure. My grandfather loved this community, and I think this is what he would have wanted. Plus, it keeps the land protected forever. No one can come along later and try to build condos or a shopping center." We worked with attorneys to set up the land trust and transfer the property. The deed was recorded in November, and the HOA held a small ceremony to dedicate the Richard Reynolds Memorial Park. They'd installed a bronze plaque explaining the history and my grandfather's connection to the community. I gave a short speech at the dedication, talking about my grandfather and how this whole journey had taught me about the importance of community, principles, and standing up for what's right. There were about 50 people there, including Tom, Amanda Ellis, James Kowalski, and Mark Chen, the surveyor who'd helped me prove my boundaries. "This land caused me a lot of headaches," I said, getting a laugh. "But it also taught me that property rights and community values don't have to be in conflict. When everyone respects the rules and treats each other fairly, we can create something beautiful together. I hope families will gather here for generations to come, and I hope my grandfather would be proud." Tom hugged me afterward, his eyes wet. "He would be so damn proud, Michael. You took something that could have divided the community and turned it into something that brings everyone together." I moved to Seattle in December, but I made arrangements to come back to Riverside several times a year. The HOA sends me photos whenever they hold events at the park, and it always makes me smile to see people using the space. Brenda Patterson faded into obscurity. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to join an HOA board in Arizona, but was rejected once they learned about her history. The last I heard, she was working as a retail manager and keeping a low profile. I hope she found some peace, but I don't think about her much anymore. The documentary about HOA abuses, which featured my story, ended up winning an award and inspiring actual legislative change. California passed new laws requiring HOA boards to carry errors and omissions insurance, undergo annual audits, and maintain transparent financial records. Several other states followed suit. I'd like to think that all the stress and fighting I went through contributed to something bigger than just my own property rights. As I write this final chapter from my apartment in Seattle, I'm looking at a photo on my desk. It's from the dedication ceremony of Richard Reynolds Memorial Park. I'm standing next to the bronze plaque, surrounded by neighbors and friends, everyone smiling. That empty lot that caused so much trouble became a place of joy and community. People sometimes ask me if I have any regrets about how things went down. The answer is no. I stood up for my rights, I fought fair, and I won. More importantly, I turned a victory into something that benefits everyone. My grandfather's property is protected forever, serving the community he loved. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are the most worthwhile. that documentation and persistence can overcome institutional bullying, and that true ownership isn't just about having your name on a deed. It's about stewardship, responsibility, and using what you have to make the world a little bit better. Brenda Patterson tried to take something that wasn't hers, and in doing so, she lost everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom, and ultimately her place in the community. I could have walked away with a big settlement and sold the property for a profit. Instead, I chose to give it back to the community in a way that honors my grandfather and ensures it will serve people for generations. I think about that quarter-acre lot in Riverside often, especially when Seattle feels cold and gray. I think about summer festivals with families laughing, autumn craft fairs with local artists, winter holiday celebrations with lights and music. That land, which caused me so much stress and cost me so much in legal fees, became one of the best things I ever did. And whenever someone asks me about standing up to HOAs or fighting for property rights, I tell them the same thing. Know your rights, document everything, find good help, and never back down from bullies. But also remember that victory without grace is hollow. The goal isn't to win, it's to make things right. Richard Reynolds Memorial Park stands as proof that you can do both. You can protect what's yours and share it with others. You can fight hard and end with peace. You can stand your ground and still be part of a community. That empty lot taught me more than any property should. It taught me about courage, persistence, justice, and ultimately, generosity. And now, it teaches those lessons to everyone who gathers there, whether they know the story or not. Sometimes I imagine my grandfather watching all this from wherever he is now, probably shaking his head at all the drama but smiling at how it turned out. I think he'd appreciate the irony. A piece of land he bought for peace and quiet became the center of a legal battle that reformed an entire HOA and eventually became a community gathering place named in his honor. The Surveyor's stakes are long gone, replaced by walkways and landscaping. The concrete foundation that Brenda illegally poured was removed and recycled. The angry confrontations and court battles are fading into memory. What remains is something simple and good: open space where people can gather, celebrate, and connect. That's the real victory. Not the court order or the settlement money or even seeing Brenda Patterson held accountable for her crimes. The real victory is transformation, turning conflict into cooperation, division into unity, and an empty lot into a community treasure. I'll be back in Riverside next month for the Spring Festival at Richard Reynolds Memorial Park. Tom says they're expecting the biggest crowd yet. I'm looking forward to walking through and seeing people enjoy the space, probably talking to some neighbors, definitely eating too much barbecue, and I'll spend a few minutes at that bronze plaque, touching my grandfather's name and saying a quiet, "Thank you. Thank you for leaving me this gift. Thank you for teaching me, even after you were gone, that standing up for what's right matters. Thank you for showing me that property is more than just ownership, it's responsibility and legacy." The HOA Karren, who tried to book my empty lot for events, learned a hard lesson. You can't just take what isn't yours, no matter how much institutional power you think you have. The Surveyor and the cease order were just the beginning. The real ending came when truth, justice, and community values prevailed over greed, corruption, and entitlement. And now, years later, that story has become part of the community's identity. New residents hear about it when they move in. Kids who play at festivals don't know about the legal battles that created their playground, and that's exactly how it should be. The drama fades, but the good remains. This is what winning looks like. Not destruction of your enemies, but transformation of conflict into something beautiful. Not revenge, but renewal. Not just protecting what's yours, but sharing it in ways that honor its history and serve the future. My empty lot in Riverside isn't empty anymore. It's full of possibility, memory, and community. And that's worth more than any amount of money or any legal victory. That's the story of how an HOA Karren tried to book my empty lot for events, and how I showed up with a surveyor and a cease order, and how all of that eventually created something far better than anyone could have planned. Sometimes you fight for your rights and discover you were really fighting for something bigger. Sometimes standing your ground means planting seeds for future growth, And sometimes the best way to win is to give away what you fought so hard to protect. Richard Reynolds Memorial Park stands as proof of all of that. And every time families gather there, every time kids run across that quarter-acre of land, every time the community comes together in that space, the lesson is reinforced. Justice, community, and generosity can coexist. You just have to be willing to fight for what's right and then be gracious enough to share it with everyone. That's my story, from beginning to end, from conflict to resolution, from empty lot to community treasure. And I wouldn't change a thing.